You would think company markets their product like this, that this is how it's supposed to actually be. For some reason, Megan Racing doesn't know what the hell they're selling. And what's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. Excited because today we're finally doing a modification on the yellow car that I've honestly been wanting to do for quite some time, just haven't gotten around to doing it. It's actually something that I've already done to the black car. And the reason I did to the black car is because this car is obviously manual, and these cars in general were kind of plagued from the factory with having a sloppy manual gearbox, and just the engagement was very questionable. Oftentimes people would have issues with getting second gear lockout and even sometimes fifth gear lockout. So what a lot of people have done to try to combat that in the manual Genesis Coupes is upgrade to a Megan Racing transmission mount, which is a lot stiffer and helps to keep the transmission kind of more planted when you're power shifting or going through the gears and whatnot. So I already installed the Megan Racing transmission mount on the black car. Funny enough, I bought one to install and then found out when I went to go install it that I already had one on the car. So done on that car, but if you didn't know, Megan Racing actually makes a transmission mount for the automatic Genesis Coupes as well. So they have the one for the manuals, and then they have two different versions for the automatic, the M8 stud and the M10 stud. This being a BK1 with the ZF 6-speed transmission. I picked up the 8mm stud Megan Racing transmission mount. So we're gonna go ahead and get that installed on this car today. Now, I'm curious to see what the changes are gonna be. I've seen a lot of videos, people reviewing it on the manual Genesis Coupes, but there's not much out there for the automatics. So hopefully we get it on the car and I can actually notice an improvement in the way the car drives, the way the transmission shifts and everything, and don't have to sacrifice too much vibrations from being a much stiffer trans mount. So we'll go ahead and get the car up in the air. Luckily, I've got the quick jacks to save the day for that, and go ahead and start with this installation. So as mentioned, this is the Megan Racing transmission mount for the 08012 6-speed or 8-speed trans. Kind of questionable on whether or not the BK2s had an M8 or an M10. So I would say for those, definitely verify before you purchase whether you have an M8 or M10 stud that bolts the trans mount to the transmission itself and not the cross member brace. But for the BK1s, it should be this part number here for the M8. And don't worry about this box. This is, we'll get to that. So let's go ahead and get the car up in the air and get the installation started. Need I say more? All right, guys, here we are under the car. Got the cross member here, and then here's that actual transmission mount that we're gonna be replacing today. So for the automatics, there's two studs on top. These are the ones that you're gonna be checking for whether they are M8 or M10 stud. And then there's 4 studs on the bottom that you'll need to remove to disconnect the trans mount from the cross member. And then there's 4 bolts on the sides of the cross member that you'll need to unbolt in order to remove the whole thing. Now, obviously you'll need to brace the transmission since you're removing its mount. You can do that with a jack, or I've got a transmission jack that I'm gonna use. Just be mindful that on the automatics, it is a plastic transmission pan, so try not to be too aggressive with it. All right, guys, so I've got my transmission jack under the transmission. Just got a towel in between it to kind of separate the metal from the plastic of the transmission pan. These 4 bottom bolts are 12 mils. The ones on the sides for the cross member are 14s. So let's go ahead and zip those off now. So they say to start with the middle ones. Zip those off. Then we'll move to the outside ones. Those are 14. Gonna need an extension for these with the down pipes. Okie dokie. Now that we got all of those loosened, should be able to remove them all. 412s. Work smarter, not harder. Got the cross member off though. Keep that there. Here's the trans mount, so it's only being held on by those two M8 studs on the top.
Are you sure about that?
So let's go ahead and remove those. They are a 14 millimeter. Let's see if I can get them loose with a wrench. Kind of working in an awkward position here, so. All right, well, I finally broke these top ones loose. They were much harder than they should have. I used 2 wrenches in parallel to kind of get them broken loose, but we should be able to get them off now. Get this transmission mount out, and then I'll show you a comparison between the old and the new. And there she is. All right guys, so here we've got the old transmission mount. See those M8 studs are kind of offset to one side, the forces on the bottom, and then you've got this actual isolator bolt in the center that allows the transmission to kind of flex up and down, which is where you get a lot of that play and slop in. You can see that it's, just that isolator, and then the rest of the inside is, hollow, besides these 2 pretty soft rubber connection points on the sides. Now compare that to the new one from Megan Racing. You see it's a fully filled in the center there on the side that connects on the sides. There's a lot of cross support. That's going to make it a lot more rigid. And then, overall, it's a much nicer quality piece from Megan Racing compared to the stock one. So we'll go ahead and get this installed. Well guys, did you notice anything? Well, upon further inspection, I did notice that indeed I have the M10 studded transmission mount, and this is the M8. So, I did read some issues with this. When you buy this from Megan Racing, it says 08 to 2012, 6-speed automatic transmission mount, top mounting bolt M8, right? So on their website, it actually doesn't even mention this 8-speed, because the 6-speed was from the BK1s, the 8-speed's the BK2s. It just says 6-speed, 08 to 2012, and then it says 2012 to 2016 automatic transmission mount. Doesn't specify the amount of speeds, and that's the M10. So in turn, it actually is the BK1s are the M10 6-speed automatic transmission, and then the BK2s are the 8-speed automatic, and those have the M8 stud from the factory. So I did watch a video of a guy with a BK2 verifying the size of his was M8, but you would think company markets their product like this, that this is how it's supposed to actually be. So turns out the mount that we got is not the correct mount. Now, I think it still would work, and I'm contemplating just running it anyway, because I do have some M8 studs or nuts that I could utilize instead of the M10s that I just pulled off the car. And obviously if the M8 stud is enough to withstand the torque and everything and the additional weight of the BK2, then it should be more than enough for the lighter, less torquey BK1. So I'm not exactly sure, because I could ship it back and have to wait for another one to come in, or I could just run it with the correct size nut. So figure out exactly what I want to do, and then we will move forward with the installation.
One eternity later.
All right guys, so here's where I'm at. I totally could return this, transmission mount that for some reason Megan Racing doesn't know what the hell they're selling and their descriptions are totally wrong. But, regardless, I definitely could return this. That would just entail contacting the seller that I purchased it from and getting a return shipping label, packaging this back up, figuring out who I'm shipping it through and dropping it off at the post office or elsewhere, waiting for it to deliver and then waiting for my refund. In the meantime, I'm purchasing the correct part so that I can get this installation complete. So it's a bit of work to get it to the correct place where it should be, which is me getting the transmission mount that was advertised as the one for this car, but actually being correct. Now, I think we're not going to do that. Here's why. So the transmission mount design is identical from the M8 to the M10, right? The 4 studs in the bottom that bolt to the cross member are identical. The actual body of the transmission mount is identical. The only difference is the stud on top, whether it's M8 or an M10. So if this were the other way around, where I had a BK2 and I bought an M10 and I took it off and my transmission actually has an M8, then I'd be in a worse situation, right? In order to try to make that work, I would need to get M10 nuts, and then I'd have to drill out the holes and the bracket bolted to the transmission larger to accept the M10 stud size. Since this car has an M10 stud size hole on the transmission, and this is an M8 stud, it will fit, it will work. I do have just some spare M8 nuts that I had laying around that will bolt to the top here. The transmission is really only sitting on top of this, and these studs are there to locate those holes. So it's not like this is really taking any amount of the weight of the transmission or anything like that. So it's not as big of a deal. The downside would be that having an M8 stud through a hole that's meant for an M10 stud is having a larger clearance, right? There's more slot, more space for the transmission to move within that, area. But I think that would be limited by the fact that it's bolted to this piece. I don't know how much of a difference it would really make, but stay with me. All right, guys, so as I was saying, we've got 2 holes in a bracket that's bolted to the transmission, which those 2 studs pass through, get nutted down on the top side, and sandwich the transmission mount to the transmission. The trans holes are 10.77 millimeters in diameter. Now I measured the thread to threads diameter of the original 10 millimeter transmission mount, and that was 9.77 millimeters. So there's a 1 millimeter clearance, basically half a millimeter on either side, all around that stud from the original transmission mount. Now I measured the stud size on the M8, and it came to 7.55 millimeters in diameter. So now we've got roughly a 3.25 millimeter clearance, or 1.625 roughly clearance on either side of the M8 stud. Like I said before, I don't think that would really make a difference once it's all bolted and torqued down properly. But to try to make it a little bit better, what I picked up is one of these little spacer collars that's not threaded on the inside or anything. And this is a 1/4 inch ID with a 3/8 inch OD. So the 3/8 inch comes out to roughly a 9.45 around there millimeter size here. So you put that into the hole, you got a little bit more slop than the OEM, but nothing significant. We're talking about, fractions of a millimeter on either side. And then this being 1/4 inch, this 7.55 is equal to roughly 0.297 inches. So that's larger than a 1/4 inch, which is what we've got here. So I can actually drill this out and make it fit perfectly to the size of this 8mm stud. So there's a better, tighter clearance on that side. And then we've got the additional gap here once we insert this, and it's really a very small insert, and that's just really to prevent any additional movement that we would create by trying to utilize this transmission mount. So I think that's the route we're gonna go. We're going to do a little bit of fab work to drill this out, cut this down so it's the correct width of the holes in the bracket bolted to the transmission, and we should be able to utilize this transmission mount. Like I said, the correct thing to do would be to return this and get the correct part. I don't feel like waiting for that. I've already got the car up in the air, the transmission's disconnected from the chassis, so I'd like to resolve this now. But for future reference, if you are looking into purchasing a Megan Racing transmission mount for your automatic Genesis Coupe, the M10 is actually the BK1 and the M8 is the BK2. That is in contrast to how Megan Racing has, promoted the product to be for. So keep that in mind when you are looking to purchase one of these transmission mounts. All right, guys, so I was able to make these collars. Got them drilled out so that they fit onto the stud here perfectly. Close all that gap there. Pretty tight clearance there, and then you'll notice that I have it lined in just some electrical tape, and the reason for that is to widen the OD of this collar so that it actually fits flush inside with the holes in the transmission. Yep, so here are these holes that I was talking about. You've got the electrical tape that's actually going to slot that in and hold it in place so that there is a tighter clearance there. Obviously it's tape rubber, so it's going to be able to compress as well and move around, but it's also going to eliminate any clanking that would be present from the metal collar hitting this bracket here. So I've got that installed on both sides, and I think that should resolve the issues with utilizing the BK2 style M8 studded transmission mount on a BK1. All right, went ahead and got the car back together off camera since it was just pretty simple reverse of how we did it before. Got the Megan Racing transmission mount installed. Obviously had to do some modifications to get it to work, but as you can see, it's all bolted up properly. These side bolts for the cross member get torqued to, I think it's like 36 to 47 foot-pounds, so I did those at 45. Hyundai actually doesn't have a torque spec for the other nuts for the transmission mounts. Those I think I did to 29 foot-pounds if I remember correctly. And that was a pretty good torque on that size M8 stud with that nut. So we should be all good to get the car back on the ground. Man, I'll tell you what, I love Quick Jack so much. Man, guys, call that a job complete, I guess. Obviously, things didn't go exactly as we initially intended for them to go. We had some challenges with the stud sizes and whatnot and how they were advertised online. But luckily, we were able to adapt and figure out a solution to go ahead and get this installation complete today. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it was informative and kind of gave you a little bit more insight into how I go about figuring out certain things that might need to be done when I come into issues like what we encountered today. So hopefully this was helpful to someone out there if you're looking at buying this transmission mount, so that you don't end up in a situation like me where you're having to try different things in order to make it work as you would like it to. But that's pretty much gonna do it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed. Take care and have a great day.